Yeah, the genesis of this whole thing. In fact, my original intent in life was to actually be in the restaurant business. So going back to the college days, I wanted to be a restaurateur. I wanted to, that was kind of my goal. I was actually getting ready to. I went to the University of Utah. I was getting ready to transfer to UNLV, and I loved working with people. And I was working at a very. I'm here in Salt Lake in a very nice restaurant that Lakai. Many people here know what that is. And anyway, as I was working there, I was actually bartending a wedding that nobody was drinking at, and one of the kitchen managers walked out. So I went in, cranked out all the kind of the back half of the kitchen. They offered me the salary at the time. I'm 22, and they offered me $31,000. I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. I was engaged at the time, all this some stable money. And what was interesting is I learned to hate the restaurant business. It's one thing to work on the front end, it's on the back end, learn to hate it. And I just, ended up getting married. We never saw each other. She'd go to work at 6:30, come home at 2:30. I'd go to work at 2:30. It just didn't work. And so my dad was a lifelong life insurance agent, and I swore I would never, ever do what he did. And in a moment of desperation, I went to my grandfather. He lent me some money so I could afford to quit. And so, and then started selling life insurance. This was in 2001. And just had, started doing insurance, had a knack for it. I got a securities license, and, a couple of years later, and just fell into this passion for it. And, was able to get some pretty significant accounts at the very beginning. And it just kind of grew from there. My father and I had a partnership through 2010, and then, worked and then set up a wealth management firm, a registered investment advisory firm called Foresight Wealth Management. And over a 12-year period, raised, got hit 1.4 billion, had offices throughout the country, multiple employees. It was awesome. And I was just wired for it. I love the people. I love solving problems and finding all these different solutions through different investments. We continued to grow and had, tremendous amount of success, Inc. 5000 for years. We were the fastest growing wealth management firm here in our home state of Utah for nearly 10 years. And, something big happened. We, condensed version of what happened, back in 2017, 2018, we had the most unlikely people here in Salt Lake City, Utah, asking to invest in cannabis. And this is just before I went public, before I was getting approved recreationally in California. And started doing some hard money loans, saw tons of opportunity there. We created a fund, started building out this incredible facility in California, but California kept changing the rules. We transitioned into CBD from California, built a 45,000 square foot facility up in North Salt Lake, this on fire. We were having conversations with Bank of America to do an IPO, strategic deals. I mean, our investors were going to 10X their money. And then in 2019, the FDA came out and said you couldn't put CBD in food. And so the price of CBD went from $5,000 a liter to $500 a liter, literally within 90 days. So it just destroyed the market. We were wholesale producers. Our cost, I believe at the time, was around $450. So this is just before COVID. Also at the same time, the SEC, who oversees our investment advisory business, had come in to do a traditional audit. And usually they come in every couple of years, after 2 years. It had been 10 years that no one had been in. So meanwhile, trying to figure out what the heck we're going to do in the CBD space, the SEC came in and audited our firm. And as they were going through things, they took major issue, rightfully so, with how, not knowing at the time, but how the plan documents were structured and the attorneys and law firm that we'd hired to do things, and took issue with it. Went back and forth for a while, didn't hear anything. Fast forward, 2021, it got turned over to the enforcement division of the SEC, and that's when my world started to just turn upside down. And, spending small fortunes every month for legal fees and kind of going through this. And at the end of the day, I mean, there's a lot to the story, but just, condensed version, what we were told we could do, what we thought was in the documents wasn't there. We proceeded accordingly. And unfortunately, I'm the one that signed off on it, and I didn't understand what I was saying, call it ignorance, naivety, whatever. And ultimately ended up losing my firm, fined several $million. A lot of the investors were people I love and care about, and we ended up having to close the fund just for a number of different reasons. And so this, during this entire process, it wasn't just losing money. It just wasn't losing a company. It was losing my identity, all kind of at the same time. Very, very painful, extremely painful. In fact, I got deposed by the SEC, and I didn't realize the severity of what was there. And there weren't answers to some of this stuff. It was, embarrassing, naivety, whatever. We'd hired some professionals to do stuff. It was embarrassing is the word to say. I became suicidal after that. It was very dark. I was under an NDA, so I couldn't talk about a lot of the stuff that was going on. So I'm trying to show up, but then deal with this behind the scenes, and just very, very painful, very, very painful. And so, yeah, and even the way it was all written, it was very public. It was, and there's just so much more to the story that actually with time, I will just say this, that there's more coming, but for our conversation today, there's just a lot more to this. But it literally lost, literally everything. It very, very, very painful. And it's interesting if I've done a lot of soul searching on this, right? I believe that life happens to us. We, sometimes things we don't choose. But we are 100% responsible for what we do with what life's given us. And we are definitely 100% responsible for the decisions that we make. There's consequences, both positive and negative. And as I've soul searched, and just my why today is I work with men, and helping them not go through the pain that I went through, is there's just, where am I going? I kind of lost train of thought. It's just, we are responsible for that. And the hardest person that we have ever faced, currently face, or will ever face is ourselves, right? And sometimes they always say the truth sets you free, but the truth hurts, right? And so, seeing versions of me that showed up, and by no means am I innocent in this, but it's like, hundreds, if not thousands of decisions lead to something. And then all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, is this who I am? And so not only losing a company, not only took my identity, but then it's like, who am I? It's like the shell of who I was. And then all of a sudden it's like, I have this, just literally in a state of being of like, I don't even know who I am. Who I thought I was isn't, and then also a big thing for me is my worth for most of my life was tied to outside validation, right? You guys are in the business world, many of your listeners, I joke that if you go to a networking event, right, it's guys walking around and it's like, who's the most well-endowed? Who makes the most money? It's just, everybody's just, showboating, what they are. And the reality is every single person in that room, including us, we all have insecurities. We all have fears. We have all these things, but we don't talk about them. So we put on a mask. And so much of my worth was tied to other people. So then everybody has all these opinions. So all of a sudden it's like, who the heck am I? And it's like, that's why I was nearly suicidal. I'm just like, it's not even worth living. Very, 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 very dark, very, very transformational. But, through the darkness is where I believe the light that we're all searching for is many times is found in the dark. And it requires that we face the darkness. And, and there's just layers and layers to this whole entire process, as far as, how to manage investor money, how to communicate, how to be fully transparent. There's just layers and layers to this. And it's interesting. I know a lot of your listeners are have taken investor capital into their projects.
Or planning on it, yeah.
Yeah. And so, and many times, especially in the startup world, you're doing it. What you're doing to investors is you're selling a story. Mm-hmm. You're selling a vision. You're selling like the potential. So you're investing, give us X amount of dollars. This is what we anticipate. You put all the performance, you're basically selling a story when you're raising capital. And what many times is, it's interesting, in a big part of our business was in, tied to the equity markets. And, historically, we know that things go up, things go down, it's all over the place. And it's to not make emotional decisions, be the eternal optimist. It always works out kind of thing. But there's a fine line between, hey, being an optimist and saying, here's what we think, but then also being radically transparent of the risks associated with it, of, hey, this is, not only sharing the good, if you will, but also sharing, hey, this is what's happening, and detaching from the investor, whoever happens to be, reaction, because many times as we're trying to sell a story, we're trying to pitch something, we're trying to control the narrative.
Yeah.
And
So
if we're being honest, we have no control how everybody reacts. And so me, one of my insecurities was, was worried about what other people think. Many times I was controlling the narrative. So I was talking about a lot of the good, through this entire process, which was true. It's accurate. So I believe things were happening, but many times I wasn't disclosing, oh, well, this is happening and this is happening and this is happening, some of the negative stuff, because I didn't want them to quote unquote worry, and just because, again, more often than not, like in stock markets, when the markets are down, don't worry, it always comes back up. It always comes back up. But nevertheless, it's still so important to be totally transparent and talk about all of it, and then let them then decide with all the information, both the positive and negative.
Yeah, this is a beautiful story. It's something that I have personally gone through in raising funds and such. So for our listeners, I think this is I'm going to go step back. Thank you for sharing that. First of all, you were able to take over, move from the restaurant business to selling life insurance, getting a license, and you were good at it, which means that you've had acquired or quickly acquired certain skills to help you later on also get more money from other high net worth individuals to put their money into the business. So selling is an important part that I think is very important for every entrepreneur, every founder to know how to do. So if you don't mind, just in that area, yes, we're going to talk about some of the negatives. What have you learned that great sales people do? How do you sell, and how were you able to maximize your talent, apply it in a certain way that you were able to get a lot of people?
I learned really early what you've got to find a way to differentiate yourself. So I was in the investment world, and the firm that I started when I very first started, I was the youngest one in there by like 30 plus years. So I'm in my early 20s. Everybody in there is like late 40s, 50s. And they're all, as I'm interviewing and asking them questions, they're all doing the exact same thing. And I'm like, so I remember going back to my office. I'm like, how am I going to compete with these guys? Everyone's doing the same thing. I'm 20 something years old. No one's going to believe. So I remember they all used this particular office used one specific mutual fund family. So I decided, well, I'm going to sell Fidelity or whatever it was. So it was the same type of thing, but to me, it's like, it was a way for me to differentiate myself within the office. And so, but, generally speaking, just kind of a general question, we can compete in service, you can compete in price, or you can compete in performance.
Yeah.
Right. And so price wise, cheaper is not always better. So many times you get what you pay for. Performance, especially in the investment world, like many times we don't really have any control over that. So what do I have control over? Service. I have control over how I communicate. I have control over I want people to feel seen. I want them to have an experience. So when they walked into my office, they were feeling and seeing something that they do not feel or have not felt somewhere else. Taking a real personal interest in their lives. We would do studies with our firm. People, Schwab and TD Ameritrade, all these firms will come in and do studies on our firm. And the amount of money that I was spending per our revenue versus how much I was spending per employee was it was in some cases 5, 6, 7 times more than other firms of similar sizes, because I believed in just like as much service as possible. I always wanted to err on the side of caution. The other thing too that I learned is, technology, tech space, right? Like tech creates efficiencies. And my rule in my firm was we will use technology and efficiencies as long as it doesn't take away from the client experience. If it's going to eliminate or take away from something personal, the answer is no. And sometimes technology can do both, but nevertheless, it's that personal touch. The example I always give, all of us get a Christmas card from the dentist, right? And it's got all the hygienist signatures on there. It means nothing. We throw it away, right? But a handwritten note, like taking just a few minutes, means the world. People remember that stuff. And I remember one year I used technology. I found this company. I'm like, we're too busy. We're going to have this company. They wrote it all out. It looked like I had written it. I literally had a half a dozen people like, you okay? I didn't get the handwritten note. They could tell it was computer generated, and so here I am like, oh, we're going to save time and money. And I realized just like little things like that, the little things make a difference.
Yeah. Good job.
So to me, it was more about how can I serve, and I'm one of my talents is to be able to find the end, or for example, if you can solve a problem too. So if you're whatever industry you're in, if you've got everybody can solve A, B, and C, and everybody thinks it's just A, B, and C to solve, but like if you can show them, well, what are you going to do about D, E, and F, and then you create a solution to be able to solve other problems they're not even thinking about. So being forward looking is a huge differentiator. Having a personality, like you have to be able to connect with them emotionally. People make decisions emotionally, and so yeah, I don't. Does that help?
I think a lot of tech founders fail to recognize that.
Yeah.
Like sometimes I say, I'm just gonna have the best technology out there, and not care about the customer, or their experience. Just technology overcomes, or they forget that once the customer buy, you still need to service them year after year, and keep adding more value if you don't want to be fell behind. So I think that's a good lesson, for sure.
I think another thing too is I think it's important for founders, when you're in your company, like obviously all the details, right? All the fine print. You understand how everything works. Well, most people, for some people, it's a completely foreign language. In the investment world, things that I say all the time, they're like, what is that? What is that? Acronyms, all different things. And so if you can actually just take a step back and realize, you communicating with them in such a way that they can connect with it, even though they don't understand all the nuances with any particular industry. So being able to communicate is huge. To me, it all comes down to connection. We all have, there's just something different when you can connect with them, when someone feels seen, when you're able to address things. It's like being able to emotionally connect with them and whatever it happens to be. And I think people overcomplicate, like, how I'm going to connect with this person. I mean, you can connect in anything, politics, religion. I mean, and you can have fun with it. You don't need to get all serious with it, but there's just ways that you can connect. And I think the other greatest thing too is you serve people. Another way of connecting is, for guys that are ticket investors, like give them, like celebrate them, get involved in their life, send them a thank you card. I mean, let them know how much you appreciate it. Gratitude is huge. I had a thing with my guys, the guys that did this crushed it, where it's like, you need to write at least a week, 5 to 6 cards, thank you cards, just because a week, just because, like, there's no reason to do it other than just to express gratitude. I can't tell how many referrals we get off things like that.
Yeah.
Well done. See, I told you he's a master. I said he's got lots of good stuff that comes out.
Can I take the conversation somewhere deep? Adam, you obviously, you said you were in a dark place, soul searching. You obviously came out. I do want to know about that, but before that, like I'm trying to understand how long do you stay in that zone of soul searching, so that you get the crux out. You identify your identity, all your fears, and all that. And then when is a good time to bounce back and now get back to the other side? I'm trying to figure out, is there a formula? Like, what did you do? Do you know what I mean?
That's a great question. And I think that there's so much that goes into that. There's so many nuances that are a part of that. I mean, I can only express my experience. I mean, ultimately what I ended up doing, like what happened to me, is I built a small empire on stilts. So this is a business podcast talking about business, raising capital, and doing stuff. And again, and I know I'm not unique in this, most men connect their identity to their business.
Yeah.
And it's the pursuit of wealth. It's let me get seen. And of course, people get accolades, they start making money. And it's like, a lot of founders are wired more, dude. And that becomes their identity, as they're being seen on that. But what the thing that happened to me is, there's other parts of the life, there's other foundational pieces that need to be there. So having a strong, a physical foundation in your physical body is a big thing for me. I used to weigh 350 pounds. So again, I wasn't taking care of myself physically, and horrible. But instead of addressing what I needed to do, I just went and worked more. I got fulfilled. I was filling a void that my physical pillar, if you will, cannot be filled by money. But yet my effort was going into that, trying to fill this emptiness inside. So I kind of ignored it. So having a physical pillar, your physical health will significantly affect how you show up in life, period. And I know this all too well. Having a strong emotional and mental space, being able to manage emotions. I believe I think in one form or another, we all have an addiction to something, right? So for most of my life, food was the drug, eating was the addiction. So how did I manage emotions? I used food, or I redirected into other areas. So my physical pillar was garbage. My emotional mental state was garbage. My spiritual side, if you will, wasn't there. But my pillar that all my worth and everything was tied to was money. And I made a lot of it. And the awards and the pat on the back, but it became about that. And I lost everything else from that. So it wasn't just, yes, I lost my identity, I lost my company, but really what happened is I didn't have anything else to really fall back on. Mm-hmm. My marriage, I ended up getting divorced. It's just all these different pillars there wasn't a very, very strong foundation. So you asked, how do you get out of that dark space? The truth is, what the addiction is addiction to me is rooted in avoidance. What am I avoiding? So again, if I'm like in my case, for example, like I can either go home and have a hard conversation with my wife and try to work through these things and address the uncomfortableness. It's learning to lean into the uncomfortableness rather than pull away from it. So I can go have the hard conversation and do that. And if I'm connected with my wife, it's going to show up my business, but I was avoiding it, didn't want to deal with it. So rather than deal with it, I just worked more. And so what happens is when we, I'm a father of 4 sons. My relationship with my boys today is phenomenal. It's incredible. Like we are so close, but during that time, my business days, I was there physically, but emotionally, mentally checked out. I just wasn't there because it was money, all the different things, my marriage, I didn't want to be at home, and so my anxiety, my insecurities and everything got projected onto my kids. So I was angry all the time, and the anger is a secondary emotion, and it was really just covering up the loneliness, the pain, the lack of self-love, all these different things. And again, for me, it was like, oh, but I got the money, I can lean on that, I can do that. And that's when I said when I lost everything, and the darkness that I got there. And I've heard suicide's real, the darkness is real. And when you get into that headspace, and it lasted probably 2 to 3 months for me, where an hour felt like a day felt like a week felt like a month, and you almost disassociate from reality. You literally, I was in a place I'd convinced myself that people would be better off without me. Yeah, I mean, it's to look back on it's crazy, but you're kind of in this state. I mean, I'm how I made it through. I'm not. I mean, by the grace of God, right? Kind of making through, but so many people don't. And the biggest thing too, when you talk about identity, is we attach our worth to many times to things that have happened in the past. So with the men that I work with now, one of the common things that comes up, and they don't necessarily have the words for it, but whether they want more money, whether they want, a stronger marriage, physically, whatever, if you peel all the layers back, almost in every instance, they do not feel worthy of it. They don't feel worthy of success. They don't feel worthy of a healthy marriage. They don't feel worthy of it, which is fascinating. We live in a very religious community here, but even for people that are non-religious, this whole worth thing is a huge thing. But at the end of the day, it's just a story. And like any story, stories can be rewritten, And so,
especially the past, right? Like the past doesn't exist anymore. If we can find the courage to rewrite the story, that we are worth it, right? Is that what you're saying?
The past is like, it's not who I am, it's what I did, or that's who I was. It's not who I am, right?
Yeah.
I am who I am today. It's like, I'm not even close to the same man I was, frankly, 6 months ago, 2 years, 3 years ago. I'm a completely different person. But I've had to work really, really hard in rewriting the story and my identity of who I am. Because at the end of the day, what matters the most is what I think and tell myself. Yeah. What are the stories what's that chaos that's going on in our head? And learning how to control that and change the narrative there is the hardest work.
Yes, it is. So I'm going to jump on that. Are you saying then to our listeners that part of the reason why the business failed, never mind the contracts that were written by legal, never mind the scrutiny from the SEC, never mind the business venture and CBD, that it's really nothing to do with that. It's to do whether or not you are whole, and that you take time to put the oxygen mask on so you can see things clearly. Otherwise, you miss the fine details in the legal documentation, or you miss this and that because you're almost propelled by the need to feel seen with the insecure gaps you've got.
Agreed. Yeah. Well, it's rooted in a story, whatever story you want to tell yourself, right? It's, why do certain people make a certain amount of money and then they coast? They're quote unquote comfortable, versus somebody else that hits that level and they're like, wait, I want more. I want, like, what drives somebody, to do more versus somebody else? A lot of it's worth, a lot of it, and even drive. It's, I think the ultimate thing that I want to embody in my life, and the quality, the trait that I'm most attracted to, both in men and women, is confidence. Confidence to me is, and how do you get confidence? I mean, you can stack wins, you can have evidence is another way to do it. But a lot of times it's also facing fears, right? Fear is what holds most people back. But the fear is rooted in a story. It's like, well, what if I fail? What if this? What if that? And it's like, so if you're giving that energy versus what if I succeed? I mean, you can flip it, that easier said than done, but you can flip the script. And just by flipping the script, right, it's fascinating, because once your story is aligned and you've told yourself, almost reprogramming these negative stories in your head, once you've told yourself something, and then what will happen is, and this is my own experience, if you tell yourself this, I mean, I take guys through a whole process of how to embody this, but you take this whole process, all of a sudden your actions will follow. Otherwise, you're so out of alignment, you're going to go, the actions will follow the story.
So this reminds me of something, the confidence. A lot of people will say, I'll have my confidence once I achieve. But that's not the way around. So a long time ago, I read a book from Wayne Dyer. He said, there is no road to happiness. Happiness is the way. The confidence is the same way, I guess. Right? You just take the action, you get the job done. All right, and then the confidence is the way to go.
Well, the biggest problem, and same for me, we all attach to a particular outcome happening. And so really, if you think about it, nothing has ever worked out exactly how we thought it was going to, ever. It doesn't matter what it is, better, worse, harder. And so we get so fixated on a particular outcome. And so not today, but my outcome didn't happen. In fact, it was the worst case scenario. And so what I didn't see clearly at the time is that door shut. There was no way to open that door. But what I didn't see clearly at the time is there were 10 other doors that had opened as a result of that door closing. And in fact, that particular door had to close in order to get me where I needed to go. And so what happens is where they have failures, and even what's the word failure? What if it's just a lesson? What if it's like that? It's just a stepping stone to get where you need to go. I'm blown away by, we all do this. We put people on pedestals. We see, those founders that like seem to have every deal just crushes it. They just mint money, but more often than not, a lot of those guys had 10 failures before that. Alex Hormozi, which everybody knows, is on social. He talks about his first 10 businesses failed, and now he's worth, I don't know, close to $1 billion or his past, but he failed, but he kept going. So despite the fail, he keep going. And again, the difference between somebody that makes it and doesn't make it, whatever make it is that the person that makes it is willing to do what the other person isn't.